March 15, 2019. Paramount Studios, Stage 7. Danny Reeves had 30 seconds left of his audition when he decided to mock Arnold Schwarzenegger's accent. $300 million careers were built in that room. Danny thought he was being clever. Marcus Kellerman watched from the shadows behind the camera. The same Marcus who'd been destroyed by identical mockery 30 years earlier. The same Marcus who now controlled which actors worked in this town and which ones disappeared. Danny finished his impression. The room laughed. Arnold smiled and spoke 4 words that seemed like nothing. "Very funny, young man." But Marcus heard something else in those words. Recognition, permission, justice. Within 72 hours, Danny Reeves would lose 3 major roles. Within a month, his agent would drop him. Within 6 months, he'd be working construction. What Danny didn't know was that Marcus had been waiting 3 decades for someone exactly like him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of polite applause filled Stage 7 as Danny Reeves took his bow, still grinning from the laughter his Schwarzenegger impression had earned. The kid was 24, all sharp jawline and cocky swagger, the kind of actor who believed his own press before he'd earned any. Marcus watched him shake hands with the casting panel, noting how Danny's grip lingered just a beat too long with each executive, marking his territory. "Thank you, Danny," called Sarah Chen, the film's producer. "We'll be in touch." Marcus stepped deeper into the shadows as Danny strutted past, close enough to smell the actor's expensive cologne and nervous sweat. The boy had no idea he was walking past his own executioner. Arnold was already gathering his things, preparing to leave for his next appointment. At 71, the Austrian oak moved with the careful precision of a man who'd learned to conserve his energy for the battles that mattered. He'd been gracious about the mockery, had even smiled, but Marcus had spent decades learning to read the micro-expressions that revealed a person's true thoughts. Arnold's jaw had tightened. His eyes had gone flat for exactly 2 seconds. It was enough. Marcus pulled out his phone as the audition room emptied. His fingers moved across the screen with surgical precision, pulling up contacts that most people in Hollywood would kill to possess. The first text went to Jennifer Walsh at CAA Danny Reeves, the Paramount Project. "Trust me on this one. No explanation needed." Jennifer owed him 14 career saves and 3 Oscar nominations. She'd make the call. The second message went to David Ellison at Skydance Ray, casting discussion tomorrow, bringing photos of alternatives to the Reeves option. Marcus slipped his phone away and stepped onto the stage proper. The audition setup looked innocent enough, a simple living room mock-up with practical lighting and a single camera. But this was where dreams came to die, where Marcus had perfected the art of destruction disguised as opportunity. He thought about the first time he'd stood on this very stage, 30 years ago, when he was still Mark Kellerman from Queens, not Marcus Kellerman from nowhere. He'd been reading for the best friend role in what would become a massive franchise, the kind of part that turned nobodies into household names. He'd prepared for weeks, had the character's backstory mapped out in notebooks, knew every line by heart. Then Bradley Morrison, all golden hair and wasp confidence, had started doing impressions during the break. Mark's Brooklyn accent, exaggerated into something cartoonish and crude. The room had erupted in laughter. Even the director, who'd seemed interested in Mark's audition just moments before, couldn't hide his smirk. "Very authentic," Bradley had said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "Really captures that working-class authenticity." The part went to Bradley, of course, and the franchise made him $40 million over 6 films. Marcus ran his hand along the edge of the audition table, remembering how his career had crumbled after that day, how the story of his humiliation had spread through the industry like wildfire, turning him into a punchline at every casting session, how he'd watched from the outside as Bradley Morrison became a star, while Mark Kellerman became a cautionary tale about knowing your place. But that was before Marcus learned the most important lesson in Hollywood. Power wasn't about talent or luck or even connections. Power was about information, about patience, about understanding that revenge wasn't a dish best served cold, it was best served systematically, comprehensively, and with plausible deniability. His phone buzzed. Jennifer's reply, "Consider it handled." The second buzz came 30 seconds later. David looking forward to seeing the alternatives. Marcus smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. In less than 5 minutes, he'd just cost Danny Reeves 2 major studio films worth approximately $8 million. The boy probably wasn't even off the lot yet. As he walked toward the exit, Marcus caught his reflection in the darkened window of the production office. 58 years old, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a Tom Ford suit that cost more than most actors made in a month. He'd built his empire one careful destruction at a time, accumulating favors and debts until half of Hollywood operated at his discretion. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd become more powerful than Bradley Morrison ever dreamed of being, more influential than the director who'd dismissed him, more feared than the executives who'd laughed at his accent. But power, Marcus had learned, was only meaningful when it was used. And Danny Reeves, with his cocky grin and casual cruelty, had just given Marcus the perfect opportunity to remind himself why he'd built this empire in the first place. He stepped into the California sunshine, already composing his next text message. Phase 1 was complete, but this was going to be a masterpiece. Danny Reeves would learn what Mark Kellerman had discovered 30 years ago. In Hollywood, there's always someone watching, someone remembering, someone waiting. The hunt had begun. The drive home from the studio lot took Marcus through the winding roads of the Hollywood Hills, where the city sprawled beneath him like a circuit board of ambition and broken dreams. His Tesla moved silently through the curves, the only sound the whisper of expensive leather against his Tom Ford jacket. He'd made this journey thousands of times, but tonight felt different. Tonight, he'd remembered why he'd climbed this mountain in the first place. His phone sat silent in the cup holder, its dark screen reflecting the dashboard's ambient lighting. By now, Danny Reeves would be at some trendy restaurant in West Hollywood, probably regaling his friends with stories about nailing his audition, mimicking Arnold's accent for anyone who'd listen. The boy had no idea that his career was already bleeding out in conference rooms across the city. Marcus pulled into his circular driveway as the automatic gates whispered closed behind him. The house rose before him, a modernist masterpiece of glass and steel that had graced the cover of Architectural Digest twice. 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, and a view that made grown executives weep during dinner parties. But it was the smaller details that gave him satisfaction. The Sub-Zero refrigerator that cost more than most cars, the wine cellar stocked with bottles worth more than Danny Reeves's annual rent, the home theater where he screened films months before their release. Inside, the silence enveloped him like a familiar coat. His housekeeper had left dinner in the warming drawer, Chilean sea bass with black truffle risotto, prepared by the same chef who catered A-list premieres. He ate standing at the kitchen island, scrolling through emails on his tablet. 3 more casting directors had already reached out about Danny, their messages carefully neutral but urgent. Word traveled fast in this town, and Marcus's disapproval was a contagion that spread through whispered phone calls and strategic lunch meetings. The house felt larger in the evening quiet. 5,000 square feet for one man, filled with museum-quality art and furniture that belonged in magazines rather than daily life. Sometimes Marcus walked through these rooms and felt like a curator of his own success, maintaining exhibits that proved Mark Kellerman from Queens had died completely. He paused at the hallway lined with framed photographs, himself with studio heads, A-list actors, directors whose names appeared on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. But his eyes always found the same image, Marcus at a charity gala 3 years ago, standing beside Elena Rodriguez. Her laugh caught mid-expression, her hand resting on his arm with casual intimacy. She'd been wearing the emerald dress that made her eyes look like dark water, and for a moment that night he'd forgotten about empire building and revenge. For a moment he'd just been a man falling in love. Elena was a documentary filmmaker, 42 years old, with the kind of intelligence that cut through Hollywood bullshit like a laser. She made films about social justice, about forgotten histories, about people who fought impossible battles against impossible odds. She saw the world in ways that made Marcus remember why he'd once wanted to be an actor, not for fame or money, but to tell stories that mattered. Their relationship existed in careful compartments. She knew he was a casting director, knew he was successful, but she had no idea about the elaborate architecture of debts and favors that made his power possible. She'd never asked about his past, and he'd never volunteered the details of Mark Kellerman's destruction. In her presence, he could almost believe he was the man he pretended to be. Marcus moved to his home office, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city's glittering sprawl. His desk was a monument to organized power, multiple phones, each connected to different networks of influence, a computer system that would make NSA analysts jealous, and a private safe containing files that could end careers with a single leaked photo or recorded conversation. He opened the safe and withdrew a folder marked with Danny Reeves's name. Inside were headshots, resumes, and a complete psychological profile compiled by a private investigator who specialized in entertainment industry intelligence. But it was the last document that made Marcus's pulse quicken, a birth certificate showing Daniel Morrison Reeves, born in Los Angeles, son of Bradley Morrison. The boy was Bradley's son. Marcus had known, of course, had known from the moment Danny walked into that audition room with his father's arrogant swagger and entitled smile. The resemblance was unmistakable, the same golden hair, the same sharp cheekbones, the same casual cruelty that had destroyed Mark Kellerman 3 decades ago. But seeing it in black and white, feeling the weight of cosmic justice in his hands, made Marcus's chest tighten with something approaching religious ecstasy. This wasn't just about Danny's mockery of Arnold. This was about completing a circle that had been drawn 30 years ago on stage 7. His phone buzzed. "Elena, missing you. Coffee tomorrow before I fly to Portland?" Marcus stared at the message, his finger hovering over the keyboard. In 12 hours, he'd see the woman who made him remember what humanity felt like. And then he'd return to systematically destroying the son of the man who'd taken everything from him. The war had only just begun. Marcus typed back, "Tomorrow at 8, the usual place." He set the phone aside, but Elena's message had fractured something in the crystalline clarity of his revenge. The folder lay open before him, Danny's birth certificate a stark reminder of the symmetry he was about to complete, but now the documents felt contaminated by the memory of Elena's laugh. He closed the folder and moved to his bedroom, going through the motions of his evening routine with mechanical precision. Shower, shave, Italian cotton pajamas that cost more than most actors' monthly rent. But sleep wouldn't come. He lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling where shadows from passing headlights created moving patterns, thinking about Bradley Morrison's son and Elena's eyes and the weight of 30 years of carefully constructed power. At 3:17 a.m., his secure phone rang. Marcus recognized the number immediately. It was a line only 5 people in the world possessed, reserved for emergencies that could topple governments or end dynasties. He answered on the second ring. "Kellerman." "Marcus?" The voice was elderly, strained, speaking in barely a whisper. "It's Harold." Harold Brightman, 81 years old, former head of Meridian Studios, the man who'd given Marcus his first real job in casting 15 years ago. Harold had been retired for a decade, living quietly in Montecito, supposedly suffering from early-stage dementia that had erased most of his memories of Hollywood's golden age. "Harold?" Marcus sat up in bed, his mind racing. "How did you get this number? What's wrong? I need to see you. Tonight." It's about the Morrison boy." The words hit Marcus like ice water. "What about him?" "Not on the phone." Harold's voice was urgent, more lucid than Marcus had heard it in years. "Meet me at the old screening room at Meridian. Building C. I still have keys." "Harold, it's 3 in the morning. You should be—" "I remember everything, Marcus. Everything." The line went quiet for a moment, filled only with Harold's labored breathing. "I remember what really happened the night Bradley Morrison died." The phone went dead. Marcus stared at the device in his hand, his carefully controlled world suddenly tilting on its axis. Bradley Morrison had died in a car accident 28 years ago, 2 years after the audition that destroyed Mark Kellerman's career. A single vehicle crash on Mulholland Drive, late at night, blood alcohol over the legal limit. The Golden Boy actor, his career already beginning to fade, had simply taken a curve too fast and paid the ultimate price. Or so the story went. Marcus's hands were shaking as he dressed. Dark jeans, black sweater, shoes that wouldn't make noise on concrete floors. He'd thought Harold's dementia had erased the old man's memories, had assumed the past was safely buried beneath layers of time and cognitive decay. But Harold's voice had been sharp, focused, carrying the weight of someone who'd been pretending to forget. The drive to Meridian Studios took 20 minutes through empty streets. The lot was a ghost town at this hour, security guards making their rounds between buildings that had once housed the dreams of a generation. Marcus parked behind Building C and found Harold's ancient Bentley already waiting, its engine ticking as it cooled. The screening room was in the basement, a relic from the 1940s when studio heads would preview films before their release. Marcus descended the familiar stairs, his footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. The door stood slightly ajar, spilling yellow light into the corridor. Harold sat in the front row of red velvet seats, his back to the door. At 81, he was still an imposing figure, 6 feet tall, silver hair perfectly combed despite the hour, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. But there was something fragile about the set of his shoulders, as if he were carrying a weight that had finally become too heavy. "Close the door, Marcus." Marcus obeyed, the heavy door sealing them inside the screening room. The space felt like a tomb, filled with the ghosts of 1,000 private viewings and secret deals. Harold didn't turn around as Marcus approached. "Sit down, son. We need to talk about the night you killed Bradley Morrison." The words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Marcus felt his knees buckle, and he collapsed into a seat 3 rows behind Harold. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, 30 years of careful construction crumbling in the space between heartbeats. "I don't know what you're—" "I was there." Harold finally turned, his eyes sharp as surgical instruments. "I followed you both to Mulholland that night, watched you force his car off the road, watched you stage the accident." The old man's voice carried no judgment, only the weight of absolute certainty. "And I've been protecting you ever since." The screening room spun around Marcus as Harold continued speaking, each word a nail in the coffin of the life he'd built. "Now you're going after his boy, and I can't let that happen. Not without you knowing the price of what you've already done." Marcus's vision tunneled, the screening room's red velvet seats blurring into crimson smears. His throat constricted as if Harold's words were physical hands around his neck. The carefully constructed walls of his empire, built on favors, secrets, and strategic destruction, suddenly felt as fragile as tissue paper. "That's not—" Marcus's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, reaching for the authoritative tone that had cowed executives and ended careers. "You're confused, Harold. Your condition—" "My condition is perfectly clear tonight." Harold's eyes never wavered. Funny how dementia works. "Some days I can't remember my nurse's name, but I've never forgotten the sound of metal on metal. Never forgotten watching you get out of your car to check if he was really dead." Marcus gripped the armrests of his seat, his knuckles white against the burgundy velvet. The weight of 30 years pressed down on him like a physical force. He'd spent decades convincing himself that night had been justice, cosmic retribution for Bradley's cruelty. But hearing it spoken aloud in Harold's measured tone made it sound exactly like what it was: murder. Why? The word escaped before Marcus could stop it. "Why protect me?" Harold's smile was sad, paternal. "Because you reminded me of myself at your age. Hungry, talented, willing to do whatever it took." He paused, studying Marcus with the intensity of a director framing a crucial shot. "And because I needed someone who understood that sometimes the industry requires permanent solutions to persistent problems." The implication hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. Harold hadn't just protected him, he'd used him. The casting director position at Meridian, the introductions to key players, the gradual accumulation of power and influence. It hadn't been mentorship, it had been recruitment. "How many others?" Marcus whispered. "Enough." Harold's voice carried the weight of decades. "But you were special, Marcus. You had the intelligence to make it look natural, the patience to build real power instead of just eliminating obstacles." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "You became everything I hoped you could be." Marcus felt bile rising in his throat. Every success, every career he'd destroyed, every moment of satisfaction as he watched his enemies crumble. All of it had been orchestrated by a man who'd seen potential in a murderer and decided to cultivate it. Danny doesn't know. Marcus wasn't sure if he was asking or stating. The boy thinks his father died in an accident, just like the rest of the world. Harold's expression hardened. And that's how it needs to stay, which is why you're going to leave him alone. I can't. The words tumbled out before Marcus could stop them. He humiliated Arnold the same way Bradley humiliated me. He's everything his father was. Arrogant, entitled, cruel. He deserves to die like his father? Harold's voice cut through the air like a blade. Is that what you were planning, Marcus? Another convenient accident? The accusation hung between them, and Marcus realized with horror that he didn't know the answer. His campaign against Danny had begun with career destruction, but where was it meant to end? How far was he willing to go to complete the circle of revenge? I built you, Harold continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. Gave you everything you needed to become the most powerful man in this industry. But I won't let you destroy that legacy by going after an innocent boy because of sins his father committed decades ago. Marcus laughed, the sound bitter and broken. Innocent? Did you see what he did today? The mockery, the casual cruelty? I see a 24-year-old actor making the same mistakes every young performer makes. Harold's patience was wearing thin. What I don't see is a man who deserves to die for being stupid and immature. The screening room felt smaller now, the walls closing in with each revelation. Marcus thought about Elena waiting for him tomorrow morning, about the coffee dates and quiet conversations that made him feel almost human. She had no idea she was falling in love with a killer, that the man who held her hand in darkened theaters had forced another man's car off a cliff 30 years ago. What do you want? Marcus asked finally. Walk away from the boy. End whatever campaign you've started. Let him succeed or fail on his own merits. Harold stood slowly, his joints creaking with age. And if you can't do that willingly, remember that everything you've built depends on my continued silence. The threat was delivered with the casual efficiency of a man accustomed to absolute power. Marcus realized that he'd never been the predator in this relationship. He'd always been the weapon, carefully aimed and expertly wielded by someone far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Harold moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Marcus? That private investigator you use for background checks? He's been reporting to me for 15 years. I know about Elena. I know about everything. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Marcus alone in the screening room with the ghosts of every life he'd destroyed and the crushing weight of understanding that his own life had never really belonged to him. Marcus remained frozen in the screening room for 20 minutes after Harold's departure, the silence pressing against his eardrums like deep water. When he finally moved, his legs felt foreign beneath him, as if his body belonged to someone else, someone who hadn't just learned that his entire existence was a carefully orchestrated performance. The drive back through the pre-dawn streets blurred past in fragments. Red lights he didn't remember stopping for. Empty intersections where his Porsche seemed to navigate itself. The radio played something classical, Mahler maybe, but the music sounded like it was coming from another dimension. His house greeted him with its usual marble-cold perfection, but now every luxury felt like evidence in a criminal case. The Sub-Zero refrigerator hummed with mechanical precision. The wine cellar held bottles that represented decades of careful networking and strategic favor trading. The home theater where he'd watched rough cuts with studio heads who thought they were his equals, never knowing they were simply players in Harold's larger game. Marcus poured 3 fingers of 30-year-old Macallan and stood at his kitchen island, staring at the amber liquid as if it might contain answers. His reflection in the black granite surface looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed, pale, stripped of the predatory confidence that had defined Marcus Kellerman for 3 decades. Mark Kellerman stared back. The boy from Queens who'd wanted nothing more than to tell stories that mattered, who'd practiced Shakespearean monologues in the mirror of a railroad apartment, who'd believed that talent and dedication were enough to overcome the machinery of an industry built on beautiful cruelty. His phone buzzed. Elena again. Can't sleep. Editing this segment about wrongful convictions. Sometimes I wonder how people live with themselves after destroying innocent lives. Marcus's hand trembled as he read the message. Elena's documentary work had always fascinated him, her relentless pursuit of truth, her ability to find light in humanity's darkest corners. She'd spent the last 6 months investigating a case where prosecutorial misconduct had sent 3 men to prison for murders they didn't commit. 1 had died behind bars, 2 had lost 30 years of their lives. Some people probably tell themselves they were serving justice, Marcus typed back, then deleted the words before sending. How could he explain that he understood those prosecutors better than she could imagine? That he'd spent decades convincing himself that his victims deserved their destruction? Instead, he wrote, "See you at 8. Drive safely tomorrow." Marcus climbed the stairs to his bedroom, but sleep was impossible. He lay in the darkness thinking about Bradley Morrison's car spinning through the guardrail, metal shrieking against metal, the terrible silence that followed. He'd told himself then that it was cosmic justice, that Bradley had destroyed Mark Kellerman, so Mark's death justified Bradley's. But Mark hadn't died that night. He'd become something worse. At 6 a.m., Marcus gave up on sleep and drove to the office. The building stood empty except for security guards and cleaning crews who averted their eyes as he passed. His executive suite felt different now. Not a throne room, but a prison cell decorated with the artifacts of someone else's ambitions. He pulled Danny's file from his safe, spreading the documents across his desk like tarot cards revealing a predetermined fate. Birth certificates, school records, acting resumes, psychological profiles. The complete architecture of a young man's life reduced to data points. The similarities to Bradley were undeniable. The same boarding school education, the same natural charisma that opened doors before talent could be properly evaluated, the same casual assumption that the world owed him success. But there were differences too, details that Marcus had overlooked in his hunger for symmetry. Danny had spent 2 summers teaching drama to underprivileged kids in East LA. He'd turned down a modeling contract to focus on serious acting. His college professors described him as initially arrogant but capable of genuine growth when challenged. Marcus stared at a photograph from Danny's college production of Death of a Salesman, where he'd played Biff Loman. The camera had caught him mid-monologue, his face twisted with the kind of raw vulnerability that separated real actors from pretty faces. For a moment, Marcus saw not Bradley's son, but a young performer discovering the weight of serious drama. His private line rang. Marcus recognized the number. His investigator, the man who'd apparently been Harold's double agent for 15 years. "We need to talk," the voice said without preamble. "Harold's dead." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. "What?" "Heart attack. 2 hours ago. Paramedics found him in his study." A pause. "The police are calling it natural causes, but there's something you need to know. He left instructions. Specific instructions about what happens if he dies before certain situations are resolved." Marcus gripped the phone until his knuckles ached. "What kind of instructions?" "A dead man's switch. Files, recordings, evidence going back 40 years. If you don't receive a specific message from him within 72 hours, a message he's obviously not going to send, everything gets released to the FBI, the press, and the families of everyone who died in those convenient accidents." The office spun around Marcus as he realized Harold had orchestrated his own death as thoroughly as he'd orchestrated Marcus's rise. One final manipulation from beyond the grave. "How long do I have?" 68 hours and counting. Clock started when his heart stopped. The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at the phone as if it might resurrect Harold through sheer force of will. His hands moved mechanically, setting the device back in its cradle while his mind raced through the implications. 68 hours until his entire world collapsed. 68 hours until Elena discovered she'd been sleeping with a murderer. 68 hours until Danny learned his father hadn't died in an accident but had been executed by the man now systematically destroying his career. Marcus opened his laptop and began searching for Harold's obituary, though none would appear for hours yet. His fingers moved across the keyboard with desperate efficiency, pulling up news sites, social media feeds, anything that might confirm or deny what he'd just heard. But he found nothing, just the ordinary digital noise of a world that didn't yet know one of its most dangerous men had died. The investigator's words echoed in his mind. Files, recordings, evidence going back 40 years. Harold had been meticulous in everything else. There was no reason to doubt his preparation for death would be any different. Marcus tried to calculate how many lives hung in the balance. Not just his own, but every person whose convenient demise had smoothed Harold's path to power over the decades. A soft knock interrupted his spiral into panic. Elena stood in his doorway, looking impossibly beautiful in jeans and a cream sweater, her dark hair caught back in a ponytail that made her look younger than her 34 years. She carried 2 cups of coffee and wore the gentle smile that had become Marcus's anchor in recent months. "Security let me up. I thought you might need caffeine after your early start." She settled into the chair across from his desk, apparently oblivious to his internal collapse. "You look terrible. Didn't you sleep?" Marcus accepted the coffee with hands that barely trembled, a performance of normalcy that felt like method acting. "Work emergency. You know how it is." Elena studied him with the sharp eyes of someone accustomed to finding truth beneath polished surfaces. "This is about more than work, isn't it? You've been different the last few days. Distant, like you're carrying something heavy." The irony cut deep. Here was a woman who'd spent her career exposing hidden truths, sitting across from someone whose entire existence was built on lies. Marcus wondered what she would do if he simply told her everything. If he explained that the man she was falling in love with had murdered her subject's father and was now being blackmailed by a dead puppet master who'd controlled his life for 30 years. "I'm fine," he lied, the words as automatic as breathing. Elena leaned forward, her expression softening. "Marcus, whatever it is, you can tell me. I've seen enough darkness in my work to know that carrying secrets alone only makes them heavier." For a moment, Marcus felt the overwhelming urge to confess everything. To let Elena's documentary instincts unravel the careful construction of Marcus Kellerman, and perhaps find something salvageable in the wreckage of Mark Kellerman's dreams. But the moment passed, crushed beneath the weight of self-preservation and the certain knowledge that truth would destroy her as completely as it would destroy him. "It's nothing I can't handle." Marcus forced a smile that felt like a death mask. "Just industry politics. You know how petty Hollywood can be." Elena's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen with obvious excitement. "Oh, this is perfect timing. Danny Reeves just agreed to an extended interview for my documentary. 3 hours this afternoon." She looked up at Marcus with genuine enthusiasm. "I think he might be the breakthrough I've been looking for. There's something about his perspective on the industry that feels fresh, honest." The coffee turned to ash in Marcus's mouth. Elena was about to spend 3 hours with the son of the man he'd murdered, probably discussing the very power structures and hidden corruptions that had shaped both their lives. The symmetry was so perfect it felt like Harold's ghost reaching out from beyond death to orchestrate one final, devastating irony. "That's wonderful," Marcus managed. Each word scraped raw from his throat. "I'm hoping to get him to open up about his family background. He's been cagey about his father, but I think there might be an interesting story there." Elena gathered her things, still radiating excitement about her work. His father was an actor too, apparently. Died young in some kind of accident. She leaned across the desk to kiss Marcus goodbye, her lips warm against his cheek. "Dinner tonight? That little Italian place you like?" Marcus nodded, watching her leave with the terrible certainty that this might be the last normal moment they would ever share. In 67 hours, Elena would know exactly what kind of accident had killed Bradley Morrison. In 67 hours, she would understand that her lover wasn't just a ruthless casting director, but a calculating killer who'd built his empire on murder. But first, she was going to sit across from Danny Reeves and listen to him talk about his father with the kind of honest grief that only comes from loving someone whose death you never questioned. Marcus had always believed he was the author of his own story, but now he understood the truth. He'd never been anything more than a character in Harold's much larger, much darker narrative. And the story was far from over. The hours crawled by with the relentless precision of a countdown timer. Marcus sat in his office watching the city wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows, every minute bringing him closer to an exposure that would unravel 30 years of careful construction. The morning sun painted Sunset Boulevard in deceptively warm light, but all Marcus could see were the shadows lengthening toward his inevitable ruin. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Kellerman?" There's a man here who says he has something that belonged to Harold Zimmer. He won't give his name. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. Send him in. The man who entered looked like a lawyer. Expensive suit, careful posture, the kind of face that had perfected emotional neutrality. He carried a simple manila envelope that somehow felt more threatening than a loaded gun. Mr. Zimmer left specific instructions, the man said without preamble. If anything happened to him, this was to be delivered to you personally. He placed the envelope on Marcus's desk like a judge delivering a verdict. He also wanted me to tell you that the 72-hour deadline is inflexible. No extensions, no negotiations. Marcus stared at the envelope bearing his name in Harold's familiar handwriting. What happens if everything becomes public? Every file, every recording, every convenient accident from the last 4 decades. The man's voice carried the clinical detachment of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. Mr. Zimmer was very thorough in his preparations for this possibility. After the lawyer left, Marcus sat for a full hour before opening the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Harold's precise script. Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm dead, and you have approximately 60 hours to clean up the mess I made of your life. You always believed you chose to kill Bradley Morrison, but you were wrong. I chose him for you, just as I chose you for this role. The humiliation, the career destruction, even Bradley's presence at that particular audition, all carefully orchestrated. You were never my protege. You were my experiment. The evidence that will destroy you includes recordings of our conversations, financial records linking you to every accident I arranged, and a detailed confession I wrote years ago explaining how I created the perfect weapon out of a broken boy's need for revenge. But here's what you don't know. There's a way out. A single action that will prevent the files from being released. Kill Danny Reeves. Make it look like an accident, just as you did with his father. Complete the circle I began 30 years ago, and the files will be destroyed automatically. The system is already in place. One death prevents the exposure of dozens. You have until midnight, 3 days from now. Choose wisely. Your creator. Sis. Marcus read the letter 3 times before its full horror penetrated. Harold hadn't just manipulated his life. He designed him to be a killer from the very beginning. Every choice, every moment of agency Marcus thought he'd exercised had been carefully guided toward this final ultimatum. His phone rang. Elena's name appeared on the screen. Marcus. Something strange just happened. I was setting up for the Danny interview when he started talking about his father's death. He said he'd never questioned the accident story, but lately he's been having doubts. Someone's been asking questions around his neighborhood, showing old photos. Her voice carried a note of professional excitement mixed with concern. I think someone might be investigating his father's death. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the trap closing around him with mechanical precision. Even dead, Harold was still pulling strings, still orchestrating the perfect collision of past and present. What kind of questions? Marcus managed. Technical stuff about the accident. Brake failures. Road conditions that night. Danny seemed spooked. He kept saying he felt like his father's past was catching up with him. Elena paused. Marcus, is there something you're not telling me? You've been acting strange ever since I mentioned this documentary. The accusation hung between them across the phone line. Marcus realized he had reached the moment Harold had spent 3 decades preparing for, the point where truth and lies would collide with enough force to shatter everything. Elena, I need to tell you something, but not over the phone. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, stripped of the authority that had defined Marcus Kellerman. Cancel the interview with Danny. Don't talk to him again until we've spoken. What? Why would I? Please, trust me. Just this once. Don't ask questions. Don't dig deeper. Just trust me. Silence stretched between them, and Marcus could practically hear Elena's journalistic instincts warring with whatever feelings she had for him. You're scaring me, Marcus. I know, and I'm sorry. But I need 12 hours to figure out how to tell you something that's going to change everything between us. The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone with Harold's letter and the crushing weight of understanding that his next decision would determine not just his own fate, but Elena's, Danny's, and the families of every person whose death had built the foundation of his empire. Outside, Los Angeles continued its eternal performance of dreams and destruction, oblivious to the fact that one of its most carefully guarded secrets was about to explode. Marcus stared at the dead phone in his hand, Elena's absence echoing through the silence like the final note of a funeral dirge. The letter from Harold lay spread across his desk, its words rearranging themselves into new configurations of horror each time he looked at them. Your creator. The signature burned into his retinas like a brand of ownership that death couldn't dissolve. He had 11 hours and 37 minutes to decide whether to become the killer Harold had always intended him to be, or to let the truth destroy everyone he'd touched in 30 years of carefully orchestrated revenge. The intercom buzzed again. Mr. Kellerman? Danny Reeves is here. He says it's urgent. Marcus felt reality tilt off its axis. Harold's final manipulation was unfolding with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. Of course Danny would come here now, when Marcus held his death warrant in one hand and his own destruction in the other. Send him up. Danny entered the office like a man walking into his own execution, though he didn't know it yet. The cocky young actor who had mocked Arnold's accent 3 weeks ago had been replaced by someone hollow-eyed and desperate. His designer clothes hung loose on a frame that had shed weight through stress, and his hands trembled with the barely controlled energy of a person pushed beyond his limits. You destroyed me, Danny said without preamble, his voice cracking on the words. I know it was you. Every door that slammed shut, every callback that disappeared, every agent who won't return my calls, that's your signature. Your fucking masterpiece. Marcus studied the young man standing before his desk, like a defendant awaiting sentencing. The resemblance to Bradley Morrison was unmistakable, the same sharp jawline, the same way of holding his shoulders when cornered, but there was something else there now, a depth of suffering that his father had never possessed. Sit down, Danny. I'll stand, thanks. This won't take long. Danny's laugh held no humor. You want to know what's funny? I spent the last week trying to figure out what I did to deserve this. I went through every audition, every interaction, every fucking moment since I got to this city. And then I remembered something my father told me before he died. Marcus felt his pulse accelerate, but kept his expression neutral. Your father? Bradley Morrison. Ring any bells? Danny's eyes searched Marcus's face for recognition. He said this town was full of people who collect grievances like other people collect art. People who never forget a slight, no matter how small. People who spend decades waiting for the perfect moment to settle scores. The air in the office seemed to thicken, charged with the electrical tension of a storm about to break. Marcus realized this was Harold's true genius, not just manipulating him into killing Bradley, but ensuring that 30 years later, the son would walk willingly into the same trap. I never knew your father personally, Marcus said, the lie sliding out with practiced ease. Bullshit. Danny stepped closer to the desk, his hands balling into fists. I hired a private investigator. Did you know that? Cost me every cent I had left, but I needed to understand why you were destroying me. And guess what he found? Marcus remained silent, watching Danny's face with the fascination of someone observing their own execution. Mark Kellerman. That was your name back then, wasn't it? Before you became this. Danny gestured at the office, the expensive art, the monuments to power. My father was at the audition where you had your breakdown, the one where they laughed you out of the room. The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each syllable a nail in the coffin of his carefully constructed identity. He could feel Mark Kellerman stirring beneath Marcus's polished surface, 30 years of buried humiliation rising like bile in his throat. Is that what you think this is about? Marcus asked quietly. Revenge for something that happened 3 decades ago? I think you're a sick fuck who's been playing God with people's lives because someone hurt your feelings when you were my age. Danny's voice rose, all pretense of control abandoned. But here's the thing, I don't care anymore. You've taken everything from me. My career, my reputation, my future, so I'm going to take something from you. Danny pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over what Marcus assumed was a recording app. Elena Martinez is going to love this story. A documentary filmmaker discovering that her boyfriend is a psychotic casting director who's been murdering his way to the top for 30 years. Think that'll get some attention? The moment crystallized around them like glass about to shatter. Marcus understood with perfect clarity that Harold's trap had been even more elegant than he'd realized. Danny wasn't here by accident. He was here because Harold had spent months, maybe years, guiding him toward this exact confrontation. The investigation, the discovery of Mark Kellerman's identity, even the threat to expose everything to Elena. All of it orchestrated to force Marcus into the choice Harold demanded: kill Danny Reeves or watch everything burn. Marcus stood slowly, his decision forming with the terrible inevitability of gravity. He had spent 30 years believing he was the author of his own story, but now he understood the truth. Harold had written the ending long ago. The only question was whether Marcus would play his assigned role or finally choose to destroy his creator's masterpiece. Marcus walked around his desk, with the measured pace of a man approaching the gallows. Danny's finger hovered over his phone screen, a single touch away from detonating 30 years of carefully constructed lies. The office felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing inward like the closing chambers of Harold's final trap. "You're right," Marcus said quietly. "About all of it." Danny's thumb froze. Whatever response he'd expected, confession wasn't it. "I killed your father. Not directly. I cut his brake lines in the parking garage after that audition. Made it look like mechanical failure." The words emerged with surprising ease, as if Marcus had been rehearsing them for decades. "I was 23, humiliated, broken. Harold Zimmer found me that night and turned my rage into purpose." Danny's phone trembled in his grip. You're actually admitting it?" "Harold's dead now. Did you know that?" Marcus moved closer, and Danny instinctively stepped back. "He left me instructions. Kill you, and all the evidence disappears. Let you live, and everything comes out. Your father's murder, dozens of others, the entire network of accidents that built my career. Then why are you telling me this?" Danny's voice cracked. Marcus reached the edge of his desk and stopped. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Los Angeles sprawled beneath them like a circuit board of dreams and nightmares, each light representing someone's hope or destruction. He thought of Elena, probably still sitting in her apartment wondering what secret had turned her lover into a stranger. He thought of all the young actors whose careers he'd methodically destroyed simply because their hope reminded him of his own shattered dreams. "Because I'm tired," Marcus said. 30 years of being Harold's puppet, and I never even realized the strings were there. Do you know what that does to a person? Living your entire life as someone else's revenge fantasy?" Danny lowered his phone slightly. "So what now? You kill me and go back to your penthouse life?" Marcus laughed, the sound hollow in the expensive silence of his office. "There is no going back. Even if I killed you, even if Harold's files stayed buried, Elena would never stop digging. She's too good at finding the truth. And you've already started, unraveling everything. Then what's the point of this conversation?" Marcus turned to face the young man fully. In the afternoon light, Danny looked achingly like his father. The same defiant tilt to his chin, the same way of standing when cornered. But there was something else there now, a weight that Bradley Morrison had never carried. The burden of understanding what people were truly capable of. "The point is choice," Marcus said. "Harold spent my entire adult life making my choices for me. But this one is mine." He walked to his desk and opened the top drawer. Danny tensed, probably expecting a weapon, but Marcus pulled out his phone instead. He dialed a number he'd memorized years ago but never called. "LAPD tip line? I need to report a murder. Actually, several murders." He looked at Danny while he spoke. "My name is Marcus Kellerman, and I'm calling to confess." Danny's phone slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. The recording app was still running, capturing everything. "I'll be in my office on Sunset Boulevard," Marcus continued into the phone. "I won't be going anywhere." He hung up and sat down heavily in his chair. The city beyond his windows looked different now, less like a kingdom and more like the scene of countless crimes he'd spent 3 decades pretending were justified. "Why?" Danny whispered. "Because I looked in the mirror this morning and realized I couldn't recognize the person staring back. Somewhere between Mark Kellerman and Marcus Kellerman, I lost myself completely." Marcus opened Harold's letter one final time, reading his creator's signature. "And because your father was just a kid with dreams, like you, like I was once. He didn't deserve what I did to him. They sat in silence as sirens began wailing in the distance, growing closer. Marcus thought about calling Elena, but what would he say? How do you explain to someone that their entire relationship was built on a foundation of lies and corpses? "Will you tell Elena something for me?" Marcus asked as the sirens reached the building. "Tell her that the story she's looking for is bigger than she imagined, and tell her that the person she thought she was falling in love with never really existed." The sirens stopped. Heavy footsteps echoed from the elevator. Danny picked up his phone and stopped the recording. "I'll tell her," he said quietly. The office doors burst open, and Marcus Kellerman's empire ended the same way Mark Kellerman's dreams had 30 years earlier, with an audience watching his careful facade crumble into nothing. But this time, the choice to fall had been his own.